And welcome to a slightly earlier uh, Polygon Issuance 26. We're going to be starting right as soon as our guest gets here, which is Dan Satterfield, the Chief Meteorologist at WBOC in Salisbury, Maryland, because we're on a bit of a time constraint. So I'm going to do all the talking about the current weather right now before we get into the nitty-gritty of the show. The current weather across the area here, we're going to have a system come through late tonight and into Saturday. We're doing this on September the 19th, 2014. They're saying we could have some severe weather tomorrow, but I'm highly doubting it because there's very little moisture. A lot of the moisture is being taken down in Texas from what was once the remnants of Odile or Odile or whatever the heck it's called or was called. So, and the rest of the next week looks dry, seasonal, highs upper 60s to mid 70s. So pretty much bland. So that's like 2 minutes. And I still have 15 minutes before we actually start the show or when our guest gets here. So we're going to have, it's going to be like, we're going to be talking really fast on tonight's program. So while I'm at it, I'll do my shout out now because I'm probably not going to have Dan do one. So I'm going to shout out that book that I can't remember what it was. Let me look it up. I'll screen share this when I get to it. So I'm gonna. Hopefully, I'm not gonna break this, but okay. So just a minute. This is the nitty gritty of the show, folks. And, well, that's not him. That's not him. That's him. Okay, this is the book that I'm gonna shout out. So, whoops, I don't want to buy it yet because it's not out yet. Okay, this is a book that's coming out in October. It's in about 4 weeks. So let me screen share it and hope to God it's not going to blow up. Say, this is what I'm going to shout out. Storm Surge, which is about Hurricane Sandy, our warming planet, and the extreme weather of the future. It comes out October 14th. You can purchase it now here on Amazon. I'm sure there's other ways to do it too. But Adam Sobel is at Columbia University. So he talks about Sandy and the climate change and could stuff like Sandy occur more often now. So, but it's been done. It's published by Harper. It says Harper Wave, which I think is a imprint of HarperCollins. Yes. So you can get that book. Right now you can pre-order it on Amazon. You can get it probably at barnesandnoble.com too, other places. So you can get it there when it comes out, or you can wait until later on. So that's my shout out. Let me take screen share off. Let me take screen share off. Thank you. So, but otherwise, what else is happening? Well, I can tell you who's going to be on in the next couple of weeks. Maybe I should tell you who's not going to be on. But we are booked for the next couple of weeks. I have been trying very hard to get more guests as we go further into October and into November. We're going to work hard. And I'm hoping I'm not going to be doing this alone. I believe Henry will be returning briefly in November. He's pretty busy right now. I wouldn't mention what he was doing tonight. He's going to a football game, a high school football game. But earlier he was deciding he wanted to play because he plays basketball. So he decided he's going to try. He did a video, which is on Facebook. I'm not going to send it or show it, but so a lot of us in our group that we work with at the Iowa Weather Network, which is what I'm a part of, but this show is not a part of it, are kind of egging him about his dunking. I mean, he can dunk a ball. He's taller than almost as tall as me. I'm 6'2", so. But that's not weather related. So anyway, some of the leaves are starting to change now around here. Grass is green again since we've had a lot of rain. That was from the remnants of Norbert. So we typically get about a remnant Pacific system about every couple of years. So Norbert was this year. Thought Odile was going to come, and Texas took it all. They really need the rain down there, though, especially around the Red River Valley, Wichita Falls. Very dry down there. California really needs the rain, too. When we talked with Meredith Garfalo last week, it's pretty bad in California. So they're on water restrictions out there, and pretty tight ones, I might add. If it's a good possibility if nothing is done soon, or if nothing is done, if it doesn't start raining or snowing, especially in the Sierras this winter, if they have another below normal year of snow out there, there's going to probably be trouble, especially places, especially in the Southland around Los Angeles, San Fernando Valley, out into the Inland Empire, down around like Anaheim, Riverside, out in that area, and then up the coast and the Central Coast where Meredith joined us from. That's where she works. The San Joaquin Valley, where a lot of produce is grown, we could see higher food prices. So even if it's only happening in one state, it's going to affect a lot of people with the possible lack of produce coming from the state of California if this drought continues out there. So that's 7 minutes of me talking. So we're still waiting for Dan. He's on his way home. He's going to be home briefly in between newscasts. He had a newscast at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, which is 6 p.m. my time. It's now a couple minutes before 7 my time, or 8 o'clock his time. So we're going to get him for about maybe a bit over half an hour. So we're going to see, but I can do like a brief overview of our guest. He, as I said, is the chief meteorologist at WBOC in Salisbury, Maryland. They also have a Fox affiliate over there, which is why he has to get back to work, because he has a 10 o'clock show Eastern Time, which is 9 o'clock Central Time, along with the 11 o'clock Eastern or 10 Central Time newscast. So we should be very appreciative that he's taking time out of his very busy schedule to run home, be on our show, and then go back to work. So I'm thanking him for at least taking some time out of that schedule to be on our show if he gets on here. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking. So anyway, he worked for over 17 years at WHNT in Huntsville. He left there in 2011, at the end of 2011, and went to Salisbury, Maryland, where he is now. So he was there when Sandy went up the coast. We might talk about that briefly. Might have to talk a lot of stuff briefly. He was at WBRC for several years before that, and before that I think he was in a lot of places. We may get like about the 2-minute Cliff Notes version of where he's been. So but he's been on air for over 30 years. So we're really lucky to have him on our program when he joins us. We're hoping he's not gotten into a car accident trying to get home. So anyway, this is a good episode so far. Wait a minute, let me bring up. Wait a minute, not that one. I better make sure I'm making sure that I can still see when he's coming on here. This thing is so... So this is the thing that I put up today. So I could start naming all the people that are on here. These are our more famous guests. I left a couple of our partners out. Probably the to my co-hosts probably annoyance, but in any case, these are several of the people that have been on in the last 6 months. So I could start naming everybody, but that would take too long. Unless we have... Hey, wait a minute. Okay, I see that Dan's picture's on here. We just can't hear him. We could do hieroglyphics. And now I see Dan's video. But you're muted.
Now I'm not. I think.
Yeah, you're kind of your audio wants to cut in and out.
Give it a second here. My computer's still kind of coming up here. How about now?
It's fine. It's I think going to mute when you're not talking, I assume.
Okay. Yeah, it seems to be. Oh, hold on. Microphone not working. That's weird.
Yeah, but I still hear you.
I know, isn't that strange? I'm going to unmute. Let's see. It still says it's microphone not working. Let me plug in. I've got another microphone here. Hang on. It's a Snowball. It's a lot better. It may be trying to connect to that. And we'll try that. If this doesn't work, or if you lose me, I'll unplug it. Okay, is that any better at all?
It's about the same. It still
Uh,
says you're muted. It likes Google Hangouts.
huh.
I mean, it's still working, so
Hangouts can't use without the other participants. Okay, I'm gonna unplug that. All right. This is weird. I don't know why it's saying that I'm muted because I'm certainly not, and I can hear you fine too.
yeah, it's typical Google Hangouts.
Okay. If you can hear me okay, we're fine. You don't need the camera, right? You just need audio?
Yeah, I only have my camera turned off because I don't trust my bandwidth.
Right. Okay. Yeah. And yeah, I figured I'll turn my camera off, and that might help the audio a little bit. How's that? Any better?
It's about the same.
Okay. Well, I think that's about the best we're going to be able to do.
Yeah. I already did all the what you where you've been, what you do,
Okay.
et cetera, so we could skip all that.
Okay. Sounds good.
So anyway, we only got the part pretty much where you'd been, where you are now, where you were before that, and before that. Was there anywhere before between when you went to school, I believe at Oklahoma,
Hmm.
and when you were at BRC?
Oh yes. I started in school in television while I was at school at the University of Oklahoma. My first job in television was at a station in Oklahoma City at KOKH TV, and I worked there for let's see, KOKH was about 3 years, and then I graduated and was the weekend meteorologist, and then the 10 p.m. and then eventually morning meteorologist. We went all over the place at KJRH, the NBC affiliate in Tulsa, which is my hometown. And I was there for 3 years, 3.5, and then I went to Orlando for 7 years. And I was in Orlando, did weekends, middays, science reporting there for 7.5 years, and then I went to WBRC.
Okay, so evidently everything before BRC you don't want to put on your LinkedIn account.
I guess I haven't put it on there yet. I don't pay that much attention to LinkedIn. I'm sorry. It's on my bio, or in a resume. I should have sent you that. But yeah, I just kind of put the most recent stuff on the LinkedIn.
Yeah, so I would assume because you grew up in Tulsa that something tornadic, severe ice storm probably got you involved in this business.
It's actually a pretty good story. I mean, I really liked weather before this happened. I was a real weather buff. By the time I was in about fourth or fifth grade, I had for Christmas I got a set of weather instruments, a weather kit. It had a anemometer, and you used counted the number of flashes on this little light to get the wind speed, and you also had the ability to measure relative humidity. And I really liked weather with that. But on Saturday, June 8th, 1974, I was visiting my grandmother in Oklahoma City. And that is, everyone hears about the April 3rd, 74 tornado outbreak. Well, that didn't affect Oklahoma. Oklahoma was hit 2 months later. And on that day, Oklahoma City got hit by an AF5 tornado. And I was watching Gary England on KWTV, and he came on the air and said, "Hey, there's a big tornado on the ground at Will Rogers World Airport." So I ran outside, and I looked in the wrong direction. I was 15. And as I turned to go back inside, I turned around toward the west, and there it was, and it was huge. And I could not speak. My grandmother couldn't see it. She'd walked to the door, and I just pointed, and she came out far enough to see it, and we both went into the house, got under the kitchen table, and that was a very memorable day. And that day, I think, I kind of look back as the day I said, okay, I want to do this.
Which is interesting to note that you've been pretty much all over the place and have put up with winter weather, hurricanes, severe weather. It's almost to the point of saying that a tornado got you into it.
Yeah, and I'll tell you something. People think, well, that must be your favorite kind of weather, because I worked in the South for a long time and covered tornadic activity for many, many years. But I'll tell you, my favorite type of weather is actually winter weather. I love snow more than anything else, which is how I ended up, I think, in some way going to Antarctica and up to Greenland for 2 weeks as well.
So I'd assume if you want your perfect weather job, it would be in Anchorage.
My wife would tell you my perfect winter job would be at the South Pole. Yeah, I don't mind cold weather. I do not like the heat, which is kind of why I left the South, really. I just tired of summer lasting forever there. I really actually like a four-season climate. I like a little of everything, and the mid-latitudes really provide that. So I'm actually very happy where I am now.
Yeah, and there's a lot of it in like the Eastern Shore is there's actually seasons instead of like in the South where it's winter, which is not
Exactly.
typically
We
winter, it's
have
typically spring, and then it's summer, which is like a desert, except add humidity.
exactly right. No, we have four distinct seasons here, and it's actually one of the most challenging places that I've ever forecasted because we have ocean effects, Chesapeake Bay effects, and even in some parts of my viewing area, Delaware Bay effects that I all have to take into account every forecast, along with the mid-latitude storm systems. My first year here, we had Hurricane Sandy, which of course was probably the most memorable storm I've ever experienced. I've been in several hurricanes, but Sandy was a pretty amazing storm. And forecasting that too was a real challenge.
Now, I before you came on, I did discuss the book that Adam Sobel is coming out with about Hurricane Sandy. It's coming out in October,
Hmm.
and I know that Sandy was a lot of the models were having some issues with it because I don't think a lot of people could actually think that a hurricane should just turn northwest in the mid latitudes like Sandy sort of did and go in at New Jersey.
Right, right. Well, at some point, I was worried that it was going to come ashore, maybe go right up Delaware Bay toward Philadelphia, or maybe even clip the Lewis Rehoboth Beach area in my viewing area. And I can tell you, looking back on it, the one model that tended to be very consistent was the Euro. And forecasters love consistency. If I see high consistency in one model and another model is going back and forth, I'm almost always going to follow that model that has the consistency. Plus, the ensemble runs off the Euro were very steady. They were edging up a little bit north, but that model by far was the best that we looked at. And most forecasters these days with tropical systems really do like the Euro. Here lately, it's not been doing that well. The GFS has done quite well in the last week or two, but as far as Sandy goes, the Euro was the star of that show.
Now, when we talk about Maryland, we have to talk about nor'easters, which you
Mhm.
could kind of say Sandy was a hybrid because it snowed as part of the storm,
Sure
as
did.
part of the remnant low that moved northwest and into the Great Lakes. So I assume you've had some. I know most of them have occurred before you had gone up to Maryland from the south.
Right. No, we've had several since I've been here, and a couple of really notable ones that caused quite a bit of beach erosion and winds on the coast of 70 miles an hour. We had one not long after Sandy, as a matter of fact, that in many ways, many people here thought was, especially on the coast, was worse than Sandy. And that is a big factor in our weather here is nor'easters, which makes it a very fascinating place to forecast because sometimes that can be very difficult to get an idea of what we're going to see with wind and rain with the nor'easter. And yes, we've had several excellent nor'easters, a couple of big bombs. The worst weather to ever hit Maryland was back in, I believe, let me see, that would have been, I think it was 62, the great nor'easter in 62, which did far more damage then than Sandy did. But of course, the coast was much emptier then. If we were to have another storm like that today, the damage would be amazing. And we're really lucky we haven't. It's coming.
Yeah, I could easily see because we're having a lot more what I would call in the last 5 years, we're either having long-term droughts or we're having sandy type storms or big nor'easters or big tornado outbreaks lately.
We've had a
And
lot of stuff, yes.
yeah, and it seems like from what I remember going back, because I'm in my 30s, it never, from what I can remember, because back then I don't think in the 80s and 90s we didn't have social media, we didn't have all this stuff, but it seems like the storms have either A, gotten stronger. I don't know if it's because it's probably because there's some climate change going on, and I've seen it in person, so I'm kind of slowly moving in the direction of that. But what it's almost like you see the storms and there's more hype to them, and they could even be bigger than some storms that could have been bigger 30 or 40 or even 50 plus years ago.
Well, we have, I think, a number of things going on here. And one of my favorite sayings is from Neil, let's see, let me get the right person right. Richard Feynman, the great physicist, who said, "Science is what we do to keep from lying to ourselves." And so what you have to do is you have to look at the data. Well, the problem with looking at the data is we have a lot more data now than we had 30 years ago, and then more data then than we had 30 years before that, and so on. And this problem is especially so with tropical systems. But add in the fact that we're now getting more people in cities. The population's much bigger. We have a lot of urban sprawl, especially in the U.S., that has caused our tornado problem and our hurricane problem to become much worse. Even if the strength and the number of storms stayed the same, both hurricanes, tornadoes, nor'easters, we have a lot more people who are affected by those storms now. You add that in, and so tornadoes are going to be seen much more often. They're going to do much more damage because there's more places to be damaged. You know, an EF5 tornado that goes across a field is an EF0 tornado because it doesn't do any damage. So that's the problem. Add in the fact that if you're talking about hurricanes or nor'easters, the sea level has been rising. It's now, 8-10 inches above what it was at the beginning of the century. The speed of the rise has now increased even in the last 30 years. So a storm 30 years ago or 40 years ago, especially here on Delmarva, the same storm would do more damage and more flooding today because the sea level is now 4 inches higher. And it's rising pretty rapidly here. So you have to add that in. And then you go into just the fact that the atmosphere itself is holding about 6-7% more water vapor in it than it did at the beginning of the century. That also adds in an extra amount of flooding. So storms are going to happen with more intensity, more high-level flood events. I don't know about you, but I've really noticed this year we've had some really big flood events. Pakistan in the last 2 weeks. Philippines has had another typhoon this week that's caused serious flooding there. India has had one of the worst monsoon seasons in many years, maybe in the last 2 decades. So we're seeing a lot of that. As one scientist I know put it, we're basically looking at weather on steroids because of the higher temperatures and more water vapor in the atmosphere. So that does have an effect as well.
And I've noticed over the last couple of years around here in Iowa, where I'm at, that it seems like because we had the flood of 2008, everything flooded. But the interesting thing is, in that same year, 2008, flood, rain, 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 rain. Got to August, the faucet shut off, and it didn't rain for 4 weeks. And all of a sudden, by the early part of September, the ground is cracking, and the things are starting to die again. And and I've noticed this every year when August comes around, the faucet shuts off, and it's like, okay, this year it did the same thing. We had gotten rid of our drought, thank goodness, from 2012. The drought was almost completely eradicated. Then all of a sudden we get to late July, early August, it shuts off, everything dries up, the grass turns brown. Then I think it was the last day of August, boom, here comes more rain. We just had remnants of Norbert about a week ago, and I had 5 inches of rain. Everything came back. Everything's wonderful again. But I mean, I look at the forecast and it's going to be dry again, which right now nobody wants rain because they're all going to want to harvest. So
yeah, we've actually had a very good season here on Delmarva for the farmers. I mean, just amazingly. I don't think you could have had a better one. Here's one thing to remember, though, about summer heat, and that is, of course, that the higher the temperature, the greater soil evaporation rate.
yeah.
You can go with no rain at all in December and January, and it really doesn't affect anything. The ground won't even get that dry because it's so cold, your evaporation rates are lower. You don't need that much rainfall. But when you get temperatures like in the plains in the 90s, mid-90s during the summertime, you're going to require, in Iowa, for instance, at least 4 to 5 inches of rainfall each month in the summer warm season there just to keep things green. If you're any less than that, you're on the way to drying out. And just to give you an example, say the pattern changed or the weather changed and Iowa got 3.5 inches of rain every summer, each month. Well, eventually Iowa would become a desert because of the heat. It would not be able to keep it green. 3.5 inches of rain is below the level to keep plants growing in the summer heat. It really depends on your temperature. And so people think, well, you know, we still had 2 or 3 inches of rain in June, but everything is just looking really dry. The ground, as you say, gets cracked very easily. Everything dries up, and it's because of the temperature. Once the temperature goes up, the soil evaporation rate soars exponentially, and that's why winter droughts not a big deal. Summer droughts or long term for a longer period of time, like what's happening in California right now, is a good example. Yes, they've had some rain in California, but not much. I just saw an interesting talk at the American Meteorological Society broadcast conference. If you go back and look at California rainfall, their winter, of course, they get it mainly in the wintertime. Summers are very dry. And you can actually come up to, on average, about 5 or 6 storms gives most of California its rain every year. And if you get 3 instead of those 5 or 6, you're in drought. California, of course, has been down to 1 or 2 for the last 3 years, which is why we're now at historic drought levels there. But just to answer your question is, keep in mind that what you're looking at is the amount of rainfall needed to keep out of a desert is very dependent on the temperature. The high Arctic, for instance, gets very little precipitation, and it basically is technically a desert, but it's so much colder there, you just have ice that stays on the ground forever or on the sea in many spots, and even in the high latitudes, they don't need as much rain because it is so much colder there than it is in the mid-latitudes.
Now, I've also seen in some cases where when we have hot weather in the summer, like we had in 2012 and in 1988 and in the 30s during the Dust Bowl, we typically, it seems like, have very cold winters for some reason. I don't know why. I think it has to do with possibly the lack of humidity, which in the winter there's very little anyway.
Yeah, and here's a bit of caution on that and I get this very frequently from people. We had a hot summer, are we going to have a mild winter or a cold winter? If you go back and look at the data, it comes out about even. There really is no connection in general. I'll explain the in general in a minute. Between a hot summer and a cold winter, or a hot summer and a mild winter. I went through the heat wave of 1980 in Oklahoma. I can tell you that next winter was fairly cold. It wasn't brutal, but 2 years after that, we had one of the coldest winters in Oklahoma ever. But yeah, the one thing, the difference between the public and science is that the public sees an effect and they make a correlation. We had a hot summer and then the next winter is cold, so they think, yeah, hot summer is followed by cold winter. But you have to go back and look at a lot of those and to see if there's really some kind of, trend going on. And when you do that, you find, no, there isn't. It averages out to either way. So that's why you collect data in science. That's why we write things down. That's why we keep the data, and why it's so important in science, because the easiest person to fool is yourself. And human beings our minds correlate with danger in things, and that's an evolutionary. I think an evolutionary heritage is our minds want to make that connection. Science tells us, hang on, do the math first, add it up, write it down, then you can say, is there a correlation? And then you have to ask, why is there a correlation? Why are we seeing this?
I'd rather take a warm winter after last winter. Last winter here was brutal.
It was a cold winter, and that's the interesting thing, is that we've been basically in that same weather pattern all summer. We had a very mild summer across the Midwest, up into the Northeast. As a matter of fact, I just got some data today from the National Climate Data Center, and it shows that temperatures were below normal all summer long. However, the globe in general had its hottest summer ever on record. in August, in June through August, and the oceans were by far the warmest ever in August. Matter of fact, they smashed the record by, I believe, 0.08 degrees Celsius, which doesn't sound like much, but that's actually a huge amount when you're averaging up 30-year or 100-year temperature records. To go by that much above the average is pretty amazing, really.
Yeah, I mean, but then you have the thing with you have all these warm ocean temperatures, especially in some parts of the Atlantic, but then nothing develops because there's the dust layer off the
Oh
deserts
yeah,
in
well,
Africa.
the hurricanes. That's a common mistake. People think that okay,
Ah,
we've got really warm water temperatures, and so therefore we're going to get a bad hurricane season. That's only one factor in the
yeah,
mix. And again, you have the Sahel dust layer. You also have the several other oscillations and the Madden-Julian oscillation waves. That if you have strong waves there, that could either enhance or dampen it. So yeah, there's a lot of things, and that's why the question on how many hurricanes we're going to see as the planet gets warmer is such a difficult question. Chris Landsea and Kerry Emanuel, both two probably the top experts on hurricanes on the planet, got together and tried to figure this out and basically said, okay, we're going to see some things that will enhance hurricanes, some things that will dampen them if the planet's warmer. Warmer water is certainly going to enhance it. And what they came up with was really a stunning paper that because they were kind of both on opposite sides of this issue 20 years ago, and they got together, which is what I love about science. The two people on opposite sides of the issue get together and solve the problem. And now what we think is going to happen is that we'll probably see fewer Cat 1, Cat 2 hurricanes, but we'll see maybe stronger Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricanes, at least in some of the basins. But there's no doubt about it that as the sea level rises, those Cat 4, Cat 5 hurricanes are going to do a lot more damage. They're also going to produce more flooding rains from the rainfall because there's more water vapor in the air, and also because sea level rises higher, the storm surge inundation is going to be higher as well. So when you try to look at just one factor on anything, you're always making a mistake because Mother Nature never makes it that easy, and that's just a good rule of measure in science, a good rule to remember. And the public likes to do this. Non-scientists tend to ascribe the hot summer. What caused the hot summer? Was it El Nino? What caused the cold winter? Was it La Nina? And it's never that easy. It's always a combination of things.
well, I could get into the two-worded dread of meteorologists from last winter, which was polar vortex,
Mm-hmm.
which drove everybody nuts because it's not really a polar vortex. I mean, it is there, but they made it sound like it just appeared out of
Yeah, I
nowhere.
think every meteorologist had that problem, and it came from some network report, and then it got picked up by everyone. And we've been fighting that battle for quite a while now. And it's not an easy thing to explain to laymen what the polar vortex is and why it's not correct to say that we're getting cold because of the polar vortex. I tried to explain it to our newsroom even and said, the polar vortex gets dragged down by the cold air, and the polar vortex can drag the cold air down. They both feed off of each other. It's never as easy as you want to make it.
And then I remember we had, God, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, they said, it might have been a month or so ago, they said the polar vortex is back again
Yeah,
because we had this big cold snap.
right, and it's not. Now, what we were in last winter was a pattern where
Yeah.
the big trough and the polar vortex itself did manage to move down into parts of Canada. So we tended to have a very strong northwest flow from the Midwest into the east, which tended to bring all the chilly air, wave after wave, down into the eastern and Midwest. That lasted all winter, and actually it lasted all summer as well. We've had a very mild summer in the Midwest and the Northeast because the same pattern has been with us. And we've broken out of it some here in the fall, but not for long. Then we go back into it. And my gut feeling is that if we don't break out of this pattern, then we're going to have another very similar winter in the Northeast and the Midwest than we had last year. Now, we could break out of it in 2 weeks. I don't see it in the next 2 weeks, but beyond that, we could break out of it. There are some hints, by the way, in the climate forecast system that we will break out of it. But my gut feeling is that it's going to return for this winter, and that we may end up having another fairly harsh winter in the east. But I never forecast the winter forecast just unless we have a very strong type of El Nino or La Nina, because that's really our only clue as to what the winter is going to be. Anyone who tries to tell you what the forecast is beyond about 10 days, you need to take that with a big grain of salt.
Yeah, and right now I'm not looking forward to the winter if it's going to be cold again, because it was so snowy, it was so cold. The entire month of January, I think, was below zero every night. I don't like that idea.
Yeah, you folks in Iowa had a really bad winter, and it was even worse in Michigan, Wisconsin. It was just a brutal winter up there. One of the worst in Pennsylvania, by the way, of the last 50 years. I had a friend who drove, who was a producer, and she would go up to Philadelphia to see her boyfriend on the weekends. And 5 weekends in a row, she got snowed in Philadelphia. And we had quite a bit around here in Maryland as well. Probably one of the snowiest winters I've ever had. But yeah, it was a very cold winter. I'll tell you a little hint here that El Nino is not a really good correlator with cold winters in some areas. Everyone likes to say, okay, if we have an El Nino, it's going to be wet in the Gulf Coast and cool in the east and warmer out west. That is the average, but there are many El Ninos that are far different, and some are a little cooler, some are a lot cooler. But there's one type of El Nino. It's called a Modoki El Nino. And in a Modoki El Nino, the warm waters aren't right off the coast of South America. They're more in the Central Pacific. And this one is an interesting one. It doesn't happen as often, but when it does develop, there is a very high correlation with quite cold winters in the Northeast, in the Midwest, in Great Lakes. Much better correlation than with regular El Nino or regular La Nina. And there is some hint that we might be trying to see one of these Modoki-type El Ninos develop. Although the last stuff I've looked at here, the last data I looked at in the last week or so, indicates that we probably will see an El Nino this winter. It does look like a pretty weak one, but I'm watching for that. And if you start hearing talk about a Modoki El Nino, then it looks like it's very likely the east, especially the eastern third of the country, the northeast third, I'd say, is certainly in for a pretty cold winter. That's one little piece of information that we can use to forecast. That doesn't mean that if we don't have a Modoki El Nino, we're not going to have a bad winter. We could have a very strong negative North Atlantic oscillation and have one anyhow. But that is one clue that you can look at to get an idea that, yeah, we're probably going to see a pretty cold winter in the east if that Modoki develops.
So yeah, we have about 5-10 minutes left, so we can get into events that you can remember from your long history in TV so far. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's so many of them. There's been ice storms, tornado outbreaks, hurricanes, etc. Yeah,
I've gone through just about everything. Probably one of the biggest memories I have would be the Memorial Day floods in Tulsa. That started, I think that was I'm going to get this wrong. I believe it was 83. It may have been 81 or 82. No, it would be 82 or 83 in Tulsa. If you look it up on Google, just put Memorial Day floods Tulsa, you'll find out. I worked that event, and I can tell you it was a tragedy. We lost a lot of people in floods. And to this day, we have a real problem in this country that people are much more worried about tornadoes than they are lightning or floods. And floods and lightning kill far more people than tornadoes.
Yeah.
And that is really, I'm just amazed how often I see people driving into flooded water and end up being rescued or drowned. And it's just gotten to be a real problem. We need to educate the public much better on what the real threats are for as far as weather goes. And heat is the #1 weather killer by far worldwide. Floods come in there #2, and lightning. Tornadoes are way down there, and that's something everyone should understand, that you're much more likely to be killed by lightning or a flood than you are a tornado. Well, I've also, by the way, had gone through some incredible blizzard, the blizzard of '93 in Birmingham, amazing storm. and then Hurricane Alicia, Hurricane Gilbert, Hurricane Hugo. I was in the eye of Hurricane Alicia, and I was also in the eye of Hurricane Danny, which hit Captain, Louisiana, I believe, in August of '85. And that was a good storm. Alicia was a powerful storm. We haven't learned our hurricane lesson in this country. We still build on the coast, and we still nationally pay for the insurance partially of the people who are building on the coast, and then
Yeah.
they're going to get wiped out. And that just seems to me to be ridiculous.
Especially those that get hit and they decide, well, I want to go back, and then they get hit again.
And then now they're now having to pay more insurance on the coast, but it's still in some cases being subsidized by the public. And so we're all paying for people to live on the coast when they shouldn't be building a house there. Or if you want to, good, take your chance, pay for your own insurance. But we now have the problem, in the 80s, the problem in the Florida Keys was the evacuation time was going up 1 hour a year because of the population increase. Well, now it's reached the point that the evacuation time is longer than the Hurricane Center can give a warning, so the only thing you can do is evacuate up. Well, there aren't too many up buildings on the Florida Keys, so you've got a real potential tragedy in the Florida Keys someday if we get another Labor Day type hurricane there, which will happen. What are you going to do? You can't get the people out. Yes, we are much better at forecasting hurricanes, and we can give longer forecasts that are more reliable than we could 40, 50 years ago, but there's still going to be the surprise that's going to be a Labor Day 1935 type storm, and you're not going to be able to get people out in time.
And even in that storm, and I've read the book on that, they didn't get the warning that well, and then they were trying to evacuate them, and then the train that was coming to get them came as the hurricane hit, and everybody died.
Yeah, it's they were still finding bodies in the mangroves into the 60s from that storm, by the way. And then, of course, you go back to 1900 in the Galveston storm. You know who was really good at forecasting hurricanes in those days, from 1900 up to about the mid-30s, was the Cuban meteorologists. They were really quite good at knowing where those storms were going, and some of the old-time folks at the National Hurricane Center met some of those folks and traded a lot of good information. We are better. I mean, the one real improvement is on the track. What's the track going to be? Where we're not much better at all is how intense the storm is going to be. There is still real problems with forecasting hurricane intensity. I've even seen a paper where it actually, the skill is dropped some in forecasting intensity. So that's the problem, is we have a storm offshore that we're saying, okay, it's a Cat 1, and it suddenly intensifies into a 3 or 4, and you have a serious issue. Camille was one of those that was a strong hurricane. It was very small, but then it came up to 200-mile-per-hour winds, so it came across Gulfport, Biloxi. And you know what? The other problem here is Sandy, really came ashore as a strong 2 or barely 3 in New York. And I think this was not the big hurricane to hit New York. If you go back to the New England hurricane, much stronger really than Sandy. We had a lot of flooding, but the same hurricane like Sandy, if it had hit 80 years ago, we would have seen about 8 inches less water in New York than we saw this time. And if the same storm hits 30 years from now, we're going to have probably another 2 inches on top of that, maybe 3. So things are changing. The same storm is going to do a lot more damage as we go into the next decades. I can tell you right now. I mean, maybe we can end with this. I'll tell you, flooding is going to be the weather story of the next century. We're going to see many, many, many more flood events. Hurricanes are going to do more flooding damage than ever before, even though they may not be that much stronger. We're going to have just regular synoptic flood events that cause major problems because we still haven't learned to quit building homes in floodplains and along the beaches and the coastline.
Yeah, that's a very good way to end this program. We're going to try to get a second part with you. We'll try and book that sometime in maybe the end of October or early November so we can get full in depth
Yeah, I'd be
on.
glad to do it. And we'll talk more maybe about climate change and more about winter weather and some of the interesting stuff that I keep up with. I'm the chairman of the AMS Committee on Station Science, so we try very much to keep up with what's going on in all the earth sciences and also with some of the latest papers coming out on climate as well. So there's a lot to talk about. I'd be glad to do it.
Yeah, so we have so much thing in on our time constraints, so we thank you for having to run to your house and have to run back to do your 10 o'clock show, I assume.
That's exactly right. Yes.
So you're
Glad
going
to
to,
be here.
yeah, so I assume you're going to be forecasting boring weather.
It's pretty quiet right now, but
And
more beautiful autumn weather.
yeah, we're supposed to have, and I mentioned this earlier, and I'm not going to start trying to talk for an hour, but anyway, they're saying we might have some severe weather here tomorrow. I highly doubt it. And I mean, I could
Risk
go
is,
on and on about
right,
this.
risk is pretty low. I looked at it myself today.
Yeah,
I think
that we're barely going to get any moisture. There may be half the state may not even get rain tomorrow, so we'll see. But anyway, thank you for running all over Salisbury, Maryland to get here and
no
not
problem,
get a
Jeff.
speeding
And
ticket.
we'll talk to you again in October or November.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right. Bye bye.
Bye. Now we're going to find out if Dan can actually hang up the hang out.
I think I can do. We'll see you later, man. Bye.
Okay, bye. So as I end this program, because we're ending this program so early because of Dan having to run back to work, he ran all the way home and came back for us. So we should be very appreciative. And we're going to try to get him back on to do a second part with him later in next month or in November. So we're going to look forward to that. That might be sometime. So we're going to have him back with the time constraint we had with him. So anyway, but you can follow him at on Twitter at Wild Weather Dan. That's on Twitter. You can follow me on Twitter at IowaWX. That's IOWAWX on Twitter. I'm on Facebook, but I hardly do anything weather related on that. You can follow all of us on the site that I work at or work with, the Iowa Weather Network. You can email Dan at his email address, and I don't know it offhand. I'd probably have to look it up. But thank you for joining us for this fairly short episode. We apologize with the time constraints that we had with Dan. He's now running through his house to then get in his car and drive back to work. So thank you for joining us for this very short episode, although it was a little bit longer than normal. So next week, Eric Sorensen from WQAD in Moline will join us, we think. And then after that, we have our severe weather show that Henry is putting together. And then after that, Rob Perlow from KATC in Lafayette, Louisiana will join us. So stay with us because we still have a lot to bring you in the next couple of weeks and months ahead. So thank you for joining us today. Have a good weekend. God bless and good night.